The autumn wind carried dust across the Arizona territory like the breath of a dying man, and Cole Morrison figured that was about right. He was running again, same as he'd been doing his whole 25 years, only this time the law had a face and a name. Marshal Wade Thornton out of Tucson, and the man didn't quit easy. $300 sat heavy in Cole's saddlebag. Poker winnings, most of it honest, except for that last hand where he might have seen a card he shouldn't have. The saloon owner hadn't taken kindly to losing, and somehow the marshal got wind that Cole's luck ran a shade too good. Now here he was, 2 days hard, riding toward the Mexican border, watching his back trail more than the path ahead. The desert stretched empty in every direction, broken only by saguaro cactus, standing like silent witnesses to the mistakes of desperate men. Cole's horse, a sturdy roan mare he'd named Steady, for her temperament picked her way through the scrub brush with the resigned patience of an animal that knew her rider's judgment couldn't always be trusted. He was maybe 15 miles from anywhere that mattered when he saw her. At first Cole thought it was a mirage, the kind of trick the desert plays when the sun sits low and mean. A dark figure standing beside the trail wrapped in something that moved in the wind like a torn flag. He slowed Steady to a walk, hand drifting toward the Colt Peacemaker on his hip. The pistol was new, bought in Tucson, with money he'd won fair and square 3 weeks back. Steel and walnut point, .45 caliber. The kind of weapon a man could rely on when words ran out. But as he drew closer, the figure resolved into something that made his chest tighten in a way that had nothing to do with fear. A woman, young Apache by the look of her. She wore traditional dress, but it was the ash on her skin that caught his attention, the mourning marks that said this wasn't a woman to be trifled with. Her hair hung long and uncut, woven with beads that caught the fading light, and her eyes held the kind of emptiness that comes from seeing too much loss. She didn't wave, didn't call out, just watched him approach like she'd known he was coming, like she'd been waiting for this exact moment, even though they'd never met. Cole pulled Steady to a stop 20 feet away. His hand stayed near his gun, but something in the woman's stillness told him she wasn't the threat. The desert around them was the threat. The coming night was the threat. Whatever had brought her to this empty stretch of nothing was the threat. "You lost, ma'am." His voice came out rougher than he intended, dried out from 2 days of dust and not enough water. She studied him with dark eyes that seemed to measure not just his words but his worth. "I am Aita of the White Mountain Apache," she said, her English clear and unaccented. "I am not lost. I am returning to my people, but I am alone, and the night comes." Tension coiled in Cole's gut. He knew enough about Apache customs to recognize what those mourning marks meant. A widow, still in her year of grief. Among her people that year was sacred, but it was also dangerous. A woman alone, marked by death, was vulnerable in ways that had nothing to do with weakness and everything to do with tradition. Your people close by. He tried to keep his voice neutral, tried not to think about the marshal who might be hours behind him, tried not to calculate how much time this was going to cost. 15 miles east. She gestured toward the rising darkness. "I went to gather medicine plants. I walked too far. Now the sun falls, and I cannot reach them before full night." Cole looked at the horizon where the sun was already bleeding red into purple. 15 miles in full dark through country that belonged to wolves and worse. She wouldn't make it. They both knew it. "I got business south," he said, but even as the words left his mouth, he heard how hollow they sounded. Business. Like running from the law with stolen money counted as business. Like a man's freedom mattered more than a woman's life. Aita's face didn't change. "Then go south. I will not curse you for it. I will only die." The words hit him like a fist to the gut, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. Simple, honest truth delivered without plea or manipulation. If he rode away, she would die. The desert would take her, or something in it would, and come morning, there'd be nothing left but bones and beads scattered in the dust. Cole heard his brother Samuel's voice, then clear as if the man stood beside him instead of lying 10 years dead in a Texas grave. Samuel, who'd jumped into a flash flood to save a neighbor's kid who'd gotten swept away and drowned because he couldn't stand by while someone needed help. Their father had called it stupid, called it a waste, said helping strangers was how good men ended up dead. Maybe the old man had been right. But sitting here unsteady, looking at this woman who'd accepted her death with such calm dignity, Cole realized he'd spent 10 years trying to prove his father right, trying to be the kind of man who survived by not caring, and every day of those 10 years he'd felt a little more hollow. "Climb up," he said, extending his hand down. "I'll get you close enough to your people that you can make it the rest of the way, come morning." Aida moved toward him with fluid grace, accepting his hand and swinging up behind him with the practiced ease of someone who'd spent her life on horseback. She settled light against his back, her hands resting gently on his waist. Cole tried not to think about how long it had been since he'd felt another person's touch that wasn't violence or transaction. "You should know," Aida said quietly as they started east, away from Mexico, away from freedom, "that among my people there are old laws, laws older than the white man's treaties or borders." Laws about what? Cole kept his eyes on the darkening trail. About widows, about protection, about the bonds that form when a man carries a woman through the night. Something in her tone made Cole's shoulders tense, but he didn't press. He told himself he was just getting her close enough to be safe, that by dawn he'd be back on his way south, that this detour wouldn't cost him anything he couldn't afford. They rode in silence as the stars emerged one by one, brilliant and cold, in the vast desert sky. Cole had always loved the stars, loved how they made a man feel small in a way that was somehow comforting. Under that infinite darkness, his problems seemed to shrink to their proper size. What was one marshal, one bad poker hand, one choice to help or not help against the turning of the universe? "Your name," Aida asked after an hour of quiet riding. "Cole Morrison." "You run from something, Cole Morrison. I can feel it in how you sit your horse, in how you watch the back trail." He almost lied, but what was the point? Laws after me, nothing violent, just some money that folks think I didn't earn honest. "And did you?" Cole considered the question. "Mostly." He felt rather than saw her nod against his back. "Honesty is rare. I appreciate it." "What about you?" he asked, then immediately regretted it. Asking about a woman's mourning year was probably against some custom he didn't know, but Aida answered without hesitation, her voice soft but steady. "My husband was Neshoba. It means wolf in your language. He died 7 months ago protecting our people's children from Comanche raiders. He could have run. He chose to stand between the raiders and the little ones. They shot him 4 times, but he did not fall until the children reached safety." Cole felt his throat tighten. "He sounds like he was brave." "He was brave, perhaps too brave. I asked him not to chase after the raiders, but he said a man who runs from a fight is not a man." She paused, and Cole felt her hands tighten slightly on his waist. "I wonder sometimes if our children would have preferred a living father to a dead hero. But we cannot ask them. They were never born." The pain in those words was so raw that Cole had no response. They rode on in silence, and after a while he felt Aida's head rest against his shoulder as exhaustion claimed her. He told himself to stay alert to watch for threats, but the rhythm of the horse and the warmth of another human presence worked on him like a drug. When they stopped to make camp for the night, Cole picked a spot between 2 large boulders that would offer some protection from the wind. He built a small fire using dried mesquite wood, working with the efficient movements of a man who'd spent more nights under stars than under roofs. Aida produced a leather pouch from beneath her dress and began preparing tea from herbs Cole didn't recognize. "This will help you sleep," she said, her hands moving with practiced grace. "The desert is cold, and your body is tired from running." Cole accepted the tin cup she offered, drinking the bitter tea without question. It warmed him from the inside, and he felt the tension in his shoulders begin to ease. They shared strips of dried beef and hardtack biscuits from his saddlebag, eating in the comfortable silence of people who'd learned that not every moment needed filling with words. "I will take first watch," Cole said, settling back against his saddle. "There is no need," Aida replied. "We are safe here." "How can you know that?" She looked at him with those dark, knowing eyes. "Because I trust the man who carried me through the darkness." Cole wanted to tell her that her trust was misplaced, that he was a gambler and a cheat, that he'd spent his whole life looking out for himself. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, he felt his eyes growing heavy, felt the world growing soft around the edges. The last thing he saw before sleep claimed him was Aida watching the fire, her face peaceful in the flickering light. He didn't know how long he'd been asleep when the sounds woke him, footsteps, many of them moving with the careful silence of men who knew how to hunt. Cole's eyes snapped open to find himself surrounded by figures in the darkness, at least a dozen of them, maybe more. Rifles and bows were trained on him from every direction. His hand moved toward his Colt but froze when he heard the distinctive sound of a rifle hammer being pulled back. A voice spoke in Apache, sharp and commanding, and then a match flared to life. In its light, Cole saw faces painted for war, eyes hard with suspicion and anger. An older man stepped forward into the firelight. He wore his age with dignity, his face lined by sun and wind and wisdom. His hair was shot through with silver, and he carried himself with the authority of someone who'd earned his position through decades of right decisions. This was a chief, or close to it, and Cole knew, without being told, that whatever happened next would be decided by this man alone. "You carried the widow through the night," the elder said in English, his accent thick, but his words clear. "You fed her from your supplies. You guarded her while she slept." Cole's mouth felt dry, and not from the desert air. "I was just helping her get back to her people, that's all." "That is not all." The elder's eyes were like flint in the firelight. "By the law of our fathers' fathers, you are now her guardian. A guardian becomes a husband when the mourning year ends." The words hit Cole like a physical blow. He surged to his feet, or tried to, but strong hands pushed him back down. "Now wait just a damn minute. I didn't know about any law. I was just trying to help." A younger warrior stepped forward, fury written across his face. He was tall and powerfully built, maybe 30 years old, with the bearing of a man who'd never lost a fight. "My cousin's widow deserves an Apache warrior, not a white thief," he spat. And Cole recognized enough Apache words mixed with the English to understand that this man wanted him dead. The elder raised his hand, and the young warrior fell silent, though the rage in his eyes didn't diminish. "The law does not ask what you know, white man. It asks what you did. You carried her. You fed her. You protected her sleep. These actions bind you as surely as spoken vows. The buffalo does not ask permission before the winter comes." The elder continued, his voice taking on the cadence of someone speaking profound truth. "Law is law because it exists, not because you agree with it. You chose to help. Now you live with that choice." Cole looked at Aida, who stood apart from the warriors, her face unreadable in the firelight. She met his eyes but said nothing, offered no defense and no apology. She'd warned him about old laws. He hadn't listened, hadn't asked, had assumed he understood enough to control the situation. "What happens now?" Cole forced the words through a throat tight with fear and anger. "You will remain with us until the mourning year ends. 4 moons remain." The elder's face showed no emotion, just the calm certainty of someone stating facts about the weather. "If you run, we will hunt you. If you stay, you will learn our ways. When the 4 moons pass, you will face the trials of belonging. Pass them, and you go free. Fail them, and you are bound forever, or you die." The young warrior who'd spoken before stepped closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper that only Cole could hear. "No white man has ever survived the trials. You will not be different." Cole's mind raced through option scenarios, escapes. He could try to shoot his way out, but he'd be dead before he cleared leather. He could run, but they'd track him down. He could refuse, but what would that accomplish beyond a quicker death? He looked at the elder again, searching for mercy or flexibility in those ancient eyes, and found only implacable law. This wasn't about cruelty or kindness. This was about a system of rules that had governed these people for longer than his entire country had existed. And if I just shoot my way out, the question came out more desperate than Cole intended. The elder's expression didn't change. Then you prove you are not worthy of life, and we grant your wish of death. The choice is yours, Cole Morrison. Live by our law or die by your own hand. They bound his wrists with strips of rawhide, not tight enough to cut off blood, but secure enough that he couldn't work them loose. As they led him toward their village, Cole cast one last look at Aida. She followed at a distance, her face still expressionless, but something in her eyes might have been guilt or might have been resignation. He couldn't tell which, and right then he wasn't sure it mattered. The stars above seemed to mock him with their freedom spinning across the sky while he walked toward captivity, bound by laws he didn't understand and choices he couldn't undo. He'd spent his whole life running from anything that might tie him down, and now he was bound by the simplest act of human decency he'd ever performed. Cole had given a ride to a widow in the desert. In return, he'd lost his freedom. And somewhere in the darkness ahead, in a village he'd never seen among people he didn't know, waited trials that no white man had ever survived. The desert wind picked up, carrying his dreams of Mexico away on the same breath that had brought him to this moment. Behind him, his horse, steady, followed on a lead rope carrying saddlebags full of $300 that suddenly seemed worthless as dust. Ahead, the Apache village waited in the darkness, and with it a future Cole Morrison had never imagined and couldn't escape. The fire had burned down to coals by the time Cole woke to find himself staring at an unfamiliar ceiling. Not a ceiling, he corrected himself as his eyes adjusted to the dim morning light filtering through gaps in woven branches. A roof made of brush and canvas stretched over bent poles, forming a dome that trapped warmth and kept out wind. A wickiup he remembered from stories told by men who'd lived among the Apache. He was inside one now, and the reality of his situation came crashing back like a physical weight. His wrists were no longer bound, but the ache in his shoulders told him they'd been tied most of the night. He sat up slowly, testing his body for damage and finding only stiffness. Around him the space was sparse but organized. Woven baskets lined one wall. Dried herbs hung from the roof poles, filling the air with scents he couldn't name. A small fire pit occupied the center, its stones still warm from last night's flames. Outside voices spoke in Apache, the rhythm of the language flowing like water over stones. Cole crawled to the entrance and pushed aside the hide flap that served as a door. Morning sun hit him like a slap, bright and merciless after the wickiup's shade. The village spread before him in organized chaos. Maybe 30 dwellings each, similar to the one he'd slept in, arranged in rough circles around a central open space where a larger fire smoldered. Women ground something between stones, the rhythmic scraping creating a percussion that seemed to mark time itself. Children ran between the wickiups, their laughter sharp and bright. Men sat in groups working on weapons or tacked their hands, never still, and every single one of them stopped to stare at him. Cole had been stared at before. He'd walked into saloons where strangers measured him for weakness, had faced down men across poker tables who tried to read his tells. But this was different. These eyes held no curiosity, no welcome, no interest in who he might be. They looked at him the way a farmer looks at a tool he's not sure is worth keeping. A young boy, maybe 8 years old, threw a stone that struck Cole's boot. The child said something in Apache that made the adults laugh, a harsh sound without warmth. Cole didn't need a translation to know he'd been insulted. "You should not stand in the entrance." The voice came from behind him, and Cole turned to find Aida approaching with a clay pot balanced on one hip. She wore fresh clothing, the morning ash cleaned from her face and arms, though her hair remained long and uncut. "You are blocking the doorway. It is disrespectful." Cole stepped aside, watching as she entered the wickiup and set the pot down near the fire pit. "This your home?" It was. "Now it is yours as well, until the mourning year ends." She knelt by the pot and began arranging stones around it. "You will sleep outside by the entrance. To share the wickiup before proper marriage would bring shame on both of us." "Shame?" Cole repeated, tasting the word like ash. "That's what you're worried about, not that I'm a prisoner here." Aida's hand stilled, and she looked up at him with those dark eyes that seemed to see past his anger to something deeper. "You are not a prisoner, Cole Morrison. You are bound by law, which is different. A prisoner has no choice. You had choice. You chose to help me, because letting you die seemed wrong. Yes, and now you face the consequences of doing what was right." She returned to her work, arranging the stones with careful precision. "Among my people, right action does not free you from responsibility. It binds you to it." Cole wanted to argue, wanted to rage against the injustice of being punished for decency, but the words died in his throat. There was a logic to it he couldn't quite articulate, a sense that maybe his whole life had been built on the false belief that a man could take what he wanted and owe nothing in return. "What am I supposed to do now?" he asked instead. "You will work. You will learn. You will prove whether you are worth keeping alive." Aida stood and moved to the entrance. "Chief Chato wishes to see you. I will take you to him." The walk through the village was an exercise in humiliation. Children followed at a distance, calling out words Cole didn't understand, but whose tone made his face burn. Women turned their backs as he passed a deliberate insult that needed no translation. Men watched him with the flat, unblinking stare of predators, deciding if prey was worth the chase. They reached a wickiup larger than the others, its entrance facing east to catch the morning sun. Aida spoke softly in Apache, and a voice from within answered. She gestured for Cole to enter, then turned and walked away without another word. Inside, Chief Chato sat by a small fire, his weathered hands working a piece of leather with practiced ease. The old man didn't look up as Cole entered, didn't acknowledge his presence except to gesture toward a spot across the fire. Cole sat trying to match the chief's stillness and failing. "You wonder why we do not simply kill you," Chato said in English, still not looking up from his work. "Many of my warriors asked this question last night." The thought crossed my mind. We do not kill because the law forbids it. The law is older than me, older than my father's father. It was made when Apache women were taken as slaves by enemies, when a widow without protection would be stolen or killed before the moon changed. He set down his leather and finally met Cole's eyes. The law says any man who protects a widow through the night becomes responsible for her survival. This law has saved many lives. It is not changed because one white man finds it inconvenient. Cole felt his anger flare. "I didn't ask for this responsibility." "No, but you took it." Chato picked up a cup and took a slow drink of something that steamed in the cool morning air. "A man does not ask the river if he may drown. He asks only how to swim. You are in the river now, Cole Morrison. You will learn to swim or you will sink. And these trials, when do they start? When the 4 moons pass. When Aida's mourning year ends." Chato's face showed no emotion, just the calm certainty of someone stating simple facts. "Until then, you will work. You will learn our ways. You will show us if you are a man worth binding to one of our women, or if you are merely a thief who got unlucky." The words stung more than Cole expected. "I'm not a thief." "Then what are you?" Cole opened his mouth to answer and found he had no words. What was he? A gambler, a drifter, a man running from everything including himself. None of those seemed like titles worth claiming in this place where worth was measured in actions rather than intentions. "I don't know," he admitted finally. Chato nodded as if this was the answer he'd been waiting for. "Then you have 4 moons to find out. Go, Kuruk will teach you the work of men." Cole found Kuruk near the edge of the village, working under a brush shelter that provided shade from the climbing sun. The old warrior was easily 65, his face a map of scars and wrinkles, his hands gnarled but steady, as they worked on what Cole recognized as a rifle. A Spencer repeating rifle 7-shot, the kind that had turned the tide in more than one fight between cavalry and Apache. Kuruk looked up as Cole approached, studied him for a long moment, then gestured to a spot on the ground. Cole sat. The old man went back to his work disassembling the rifle with movements so practiced they seemed like ritual. Cole watched, saying nothing, remembering his father's advice that a smart man learned by watching before he opened his fool mouth. An hour passed, then another. Kuruk worked through 3 rifles, cleaning them, checking their mechanisms, setting them aside. He never spoke, never acknowledged Cole's presence beyond that initial gesture. The silence stretched like rawhide in the sun, tight and uncomfortable. Finally, Cole's patience broke. "You going to teach me something or just ignore me all day?" Kuruk set down the rifle he'd been working on and looked at Cole with eyes that held neither anger nor approval, just assessment. Man who talks while working does neither well. The words hit Cole like a punch to the gut, not because they were harsh, but because they were true. How many times had he run his mouth at a poker table, giving away tells with nervous chatter? How many times had he talked himself into or out of situations that required action instead of words? "I'm here to learn," Cole said quietly. "Teach me." Kuruk picked up a rifle that had seen better days. Its stock cracked and its barrel fouled. He handed it to Cole along with a cleaning rod and a scrap of cloth. Then he went back to his own work without another word. Cole studied the weapon, remembering what his brother Samuel had taught him about gun maintenance. "You respect the tool," Samuel used to say, "and the tool respects you back." He began working on the rifle, cleaning the barrel, checking the action, testing the trigger pull. His hands remembered what his mind had half forgotten, and slowly the weapon began to respond. When the sun reached its peak, a young woman approached carrying a basket. She set it down between them and left without speaking. Inside were corn cakes and strips of dried meat. Kuruk ate methodically, his eyes never leaving his work. Cole followed his example, understanding, without being told, that meals were fuel, not social events. As the afternoon wore on, Cole's respect for Kuruk grew. The old man's hands moved with the confidence of someone who'd spent decades perfecting his craft. He could disassemble a rifle blindfolded, could hear a problem in the mechanism that Cole wouldn't have noticed. This wasn't just work, it was art. By the time the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Cole had cleaned and repaired 3 rifles under Kuruk's silent supervision. His hands ached, his back hurt from sitting cross-legged, and his mind felt clearer than it had in months. Something about the focused work, the absence of words and decisions and running, settled him in a way he couldn't explain. As they were packing away the tools, Kuruk finally spoke again. "You have worked with guns before." "My brother taught me, before he died." Kuruk nodded slowly. "Death teaches the living if they are willing to learn." Cole wanted to ask what that meant, but the old man was already standing, already walking away toward his own wickiup. The lesson, apparently, was over. Cole made his way back to Aita's dwelling, unsure what else to do or where else to go. He found her sitting outside working on something with thin strips of what looked like yucca fiber. Her hands moved with the same practiced grace as Kuruk's creating patterns that seemed random until they suddenly resolved into recognizable shapes. "You survived your first day," she said without looking up. "Some doubted you would. They thought Kuruk would kill me. They thought you would run." She tied off a strand and examined her work. "Many white men choose death over patience." Cole settled onto the ground, a respectful distance away, watching her hands create something from nothing. "What are you making?" "A basket. For carrying water or food or medicine, whatever is needed." "You know what your people think of me." The question came out harder than Cole intended. They look at me like I'm something that crawled out from under a rock. They look at you as a man who has not yet proven his worth. This is not an insult. It is reality. Aida's hands never stopped moving. Among my people, worth is not inherited or assumed. It is earned through action. You have taken no action yet except to be captured by a situation you created. I created? Cole felt his anger rising again. You're the one who gave me that tea. You're the one who performed whatever ritual was needed to trap me. For the first time, Aida's hands stopped. She set down her basket work and looked at him directly, and Cole saw something in her face he hadn't expected. Shame. Yes, she said quietly. The tea was required by the ritual. If I had not performed it, the law would not have bound you. You would have delivered me close to my people and ridden away free. So you did trap me. Yes, I chose my life over your freedom. I will not apologize for surviving Cole Morrison. Would you? The question hung in the air between them like smoke. Cole wanted to say yes, wanted to claim some moral high ground, but the truth was he'd spent his whole life choosing his own survival over everything else. He'd cheated at cards when he needed money. He'd lied to marshals when he needed to escape. He'd walked away from people who needed help because helping wasn't convenient. No, he admitted finally. I wouldn't apologize for surviving. Then we understand each other. Aida picked up her basket work again. I needed protection. You provided it. Now we both live with the consequences. Tell me about him, Cole said, surprising himself with the request. About your husband. Aida's hands stilled again, but this time her face softened with memory. Neshoba was tall, strong, proud. We married when I was 17, a match arranged between families. I did not love him at first. Love came slowly over years of walking the same path. What happened to him? Comanche raiders came for our horses. They found children playing near the stream instead. Her voice remained steady, but Cole heard the pain underneath. Neshoba could have stayed hidden, could have let them take the children and save himself. He chose to stand between the raiders and the little ones. They shot him 4 times. He did not fall until the last child reached safety. Cole felt something twist in his chest, recognizing in Neshoba's choice the same impulse that had driven Samuel into that flood, the same stupid, beautiful instinct to put others before self. He sounds like he was a good man. He was, perhaps too good. I begged him not to chase the raiders, but he said a man who runs from a fight is not a man. I wonder, she paused, her hands trembling slightly, I wonder if our children, had we been blessed with any, would have preferred a living father to a dead hero. The silence that followed felt sacred somehow. 2 people joined by loss even as they remained strangers. Cole found himself wanting to tell her about Samuel, about the flood, about how their father had called it a waste. But before he could find the words, a commotion erupted from the village center, raised voices angry and challenging. Cole stood, instinct telling him this concerned him even before he saw warriors gathering in a circle. Aida rose as well, her face troubled. What's happening? Dakota, she said simply, as if the name explained everything. They walked toward the gathering crowd, arriving just as the circle parted to reveal the young warrior Cole had seen the night before. Dakota stood in the center, his face set with determination and barely controlled rage. When he saw Cole, his eyes lit with something that might have been satisfaction. The white man comes, Dakota announced in English clearly for Cole's benefit. Good. I challenge him to a contest of strength. If he refuses, he proves himself a coward unworthy of an Apache woman. The crowd fell silent, waiting. Cole looked at Aida, saw the plea in her eyes. You do not have to accept, she said quietly. Dakota tries to shame you into proving yourself weak. But Cole was done being cautious, done playing it safe. He'd spent his whole life avoiding confrontation, running from anything that might require him to stand his ground. Maybe that was why he was here now, bound by laws he didn't understand, and choices he couldn't undo. What kind of contest? He called out, stepping into the circle. Dakota's smile was all teeth and no warmth. Wrestling, no closed fists. First man to throw the other and hold him to the ground for 10 heartbeats wins. And if I lose, you work an extra month as the lowest in the village. You eat last. You sleep in the cold. And everyone knows the white man is weak. And if I win, Dakota's smile faded, you will not win. Cole looked around the circle, seeing the faces of people who'd written him off as worthless, seeing children who'd mocked him, seeing men who'd already decided he wasn't worth the air he breathed. He thought about his father's voice saying, "Don't be stupid like your brother." He thought about Samuel saying, "Sometimes a man has to stand for something, or he ends up standing for nothing." "Tomorrow at sunrise," Cole said, "I accept your challenge." The crowd erupted in conversation, but Cole was already walking away, his heart pounding, his mind racing through everything he'd just agreed to. He'd been in plenty of fights, but those were drunken brawls in saloons, wild swings fueled by whiskey and bad tempers. This would be different. This would be skill against skill, with his dignity and possibly his survival on the line. Aida caught up to him outside her wickiup. "Why did you accept? You could have refused without shame." "If I don't fight, I am weak," Cole said, echoing Dakota's earlier words. "And a weak man isn't worth protecting." "You sound like Neshoba." Something in her voice made Cole look at her, seeing tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. He said the same thing before he went to face the raiders. "Pride is not always wisdom, Cole Morrison." "Maybe not. But sometimes it's all a man's got left." That night, as Cole lay on his blanket outside the Wikiup's entrance, staring up at stars that wheeled overhead like distant witnesses, he wondered if he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life. Probably not, he decided. Getting caught cheating at cards still held that title. This was maybe the second biggest. But as sleep finally claimed him, Cole realized something had changed. For the first time since being captured, he wasn't thinking about escape. He was thinking about winning, about proving something not to Dakota or the tribe, but to himself. He'd spent 25 years running from everything. Tomorrow, he'd finally stand and fight. 6 weeks had passed since the wrestling match, and Cole Morrison's body bore the evidence of those days like a map written in bruises and calluses. The fight with Dakota had ended in a draw, though Cole suspected the warrior had earned more respect from the tribe by bloodying Cole's nose than Cole had earned by staying on his feet. But something had shifted that day. The children no longer threw stones. The women no longer turned their backs quite so deliberately. And Dakota himself had begun to nod when their paths crossed a bare acknowledgement that Cole might be worth the air he breathed after all. November had brought cold to the high desert, the kind that crept into bones and made morning fires a necessity rather than a comfort. Cole's hands had toughened from 6 weeks of work under Kuruk's silent tutelage. He could now strip and clean a rifle in under 10 minutes, could craft serviceable arrows from straight shoots, could start a fire with a bow drill, though it still took him longer than any Apache child over the age of 8. The compass his father had given him still hung from a cord around his neck, tucked beneath his shirt where no one could see it. He checked it every morning out of habit, watching the needle point north toward a freedom that seemed less urgent with each passing day. The fact troubled him more than he wanted to admit. This particular morning found him on the eastern ridge above the village tracking deer with 3 young warriors who decided he was competent enough not to scare away all the game. The men moved through the scrub brush like shadows, their footsteps silent, where Cole still crunched and snapped despite his best efforts. One of them, a youth named Hania, who couldn't be more than 20, kept looking back to make sure Cole hadn't fallen too far behind. They found the deer trail an hour after sunrise, fresh tracks pressed into soft earth near a seasonal stream. The warriors fanned out without speaking, each taking a position according to some plan Cole hadn't been privy to. He followed Hania's hand signals, moving to cover the southern approach, trying to remember everything Kuruk had taught him about patience and breath control. The deer came 20 minutes later, a young buck with antlers still in velvet. Cole watched as Hania drew his bow with movements so smooth they seemed choreographed. The arrow flew true, taking the deer through the heart. It ran 30 yards before its legs folded, and then it was over. They dressed the animal on sight, and Cole was surprised when one of the warriors handed him the liver, still warm and dripping, an honor he'd learned reserved for those who'd contributed to the hunt. He ate it raw, as they did the coppery taste, making him gag, even as his body recognized the nourishment. By the time they returned to the village with the deer slung on a pole between them, the sun had reached its peak and Cole's legs burned from the morning's exertion. They delivered the meat to the women who handled butchering, and Cole was turning toward Kuruk's workshop when he heard his name spoken in accented English. "Cole Morrison, walk with me." He turned to find Aita approaching a gathering basket slung over one arm. In 6 weeks, they'd spoken perhaps a dozen times beyond necessary exchanges about sleeping arrangements and meal schedules. She'd maintained a careful distance, and Cole had respected it, understanding that whatever strange bond the law claimed existed between them, it remained theoretical until proven otherwise. "Where?" he asked. "To gather medicine plants. The winter sicknesses will come soon, and we must prepare." She glanced at the other women working on the deer. "Also, you should learn. If you survive the trials and choose to stay, you will need to know which plants heal and which plants kill." The casual way she said, "if you survive," sent a chill down Cole's spine that had nothing to do with the November wind. He followed her out of the village, walking a respectful distance behind as custom seemed to dictate, watching how she moved through the desert landscape with the confidence of someone reading a familiar book. "Here," she said, after they'd walked perhaps a mile, kneeling beside a plant with silvery leaves. "Yerba mansa, for wounds that fester. You crush the leaves and roots together, make a paste apply to the injury." Cole knelt beside her, studying the plant, committing its shape to memory. "How do you remember them all? My mother taught me. Her mother taught her. Knowledge passes down like water flowing downhill. Some is lost along the way, but enough remains to sustain life." She carefully dug around the plant's roots, extracting it whole and placing it in her basket. "Your people have this too. Yes, knowledge passed down. Some," Cole admitted. "My brother taught me about horses and guns. My father taught me about cards and whiskey. And which lesson served you better?" Cole had no answer to that. They continued gathering Aita, pointing out Mormon tea for fever, prickly pear for food and medicine, creosote bush for infections. Cole tried to absorb it all, knowing his life might depend on remembering these details, but finding his attention drifting to the woman beside him instead. She'd changed in 6 weeks, or perhaps he'd simply learned to see her more clearly. The morning marks were gone now, washed away at dawn each day as custom required. Her hair remained uncut, but she'd begun to braid it in patterns that spoke of her status as a widow nearing the end of her required grief. She moved with a grace that came from perfect confidence in her body and her place in the world. "You still wear the compass," she said without looking at him, her hands continuing their work among the plants. "You check it each morning. I see you through the wickiup wall." Cole's fingers found the compass beneath his shirt. "Habit. Or hope. Hope that one day it will tell you where to go. Don't need a compass to know I don't belong here." Aita straightened her gaze, piercing through his defenses. "Belonging is not about where you come from, Cole Morrison. It is about who will stand with you when trouble comes." Before Cole could respond, Aita's posture changed. She dropped into a crouch, her hand raised in a signal for silence. Cole froze, his own senses suddenly alert to danger he couldn't yet identify. Then he heard it, the sound of horses moving through the brush, perhaps a quarter-mile distant. Too many horses for a hunting party. Too deliberate in their approach for anything innocent. Aita moved like smoke toward a cluster of rocks that offered cover, and Cole followed his hand, dropping to the knife Kuruk had given him 3 weeks earlier. They reached the rocks and peered over the top just as 5 riders emerged from the scrub on the far side of the small valley. Even at this distance, Cole recognized trouble. The riders wore the hard-used clothing of men who lived outside the law, their horses lathered, from hard riding their weapons displayed, with the casual menace of those who expected to use them. The leader was a big man with a beard that hung halfway down his chest, and something about the way he sat, his horse sent recognition shooting through Cole's mind. Jackson Dalton. The same Jackson Dalton whose gang had been raiding through Arizona territory for the past year. The same gang that occasionally hired out as recovery agents when someone needed a debt collected or a fugitive retrieved. The same gang that Marshal Wade Thornton might very well have hired to find one missing gambler. "You know them," Aida whispered, reading his face. "Dalton Brothers gang. Bad men. Very bad." "Why are they here?" Cole's throat tightened as the answer crystallized with horrible certainty. "They're looking for me." They watched as the riders circled the valley, slowly, clearly tracking something. Looking for signs, looking for a trail that would lead them to an Apache village and the white man who'd sought shelter there. Looking for $300 in poker winnings and whatever bounty the marshal had promised. "We need to go," Cole said quietly. "Need to warn the village." They moved quickly but carefully back the way they'd come, Aida leading along paths that offered maximum cover. Thoughts tumbled through Cole's head, each scenario worse than the last. If the Dalton gang found the village, they'd use him as an excuse to attack. They'd kill anyone who got in their way, take what they wanted, and burn the rest. Women, children, elders, none of it would matter to men like Jackson Dalton. They reached the village as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon. Cole went straight to Chief Chato's wiki-up Aida, close behind. The old man listened to their report with a face that revealed nothing, but his eyes grew hard as flint. "How many men?" he asked. "5 that I saw, maybe more hanging back." "And they hunt you?" Cole nodded, shame burning in his chest. "Money I won in Tucson. The law wants it back. These men, they don't care about law, they care about getting paid." Chato was silent for a long moment, his weathered hands folded in his lap. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of difficult decisions made in dark times. "I can send you away tonight, with a horse and supplies. The law allows me to release you when your presence brings danger to the tribe." The words hit Cole like a physical blow. Freedom, offered freely, without condition or shame. He could ride out tonight, lead the Dalton gang away from these people, disappear into Mexico or California or anywhere the compass pointed. His debt would be paid, his obligation fulfilled. "You did not bring this danger intentionally," Chato continued. "I will not hold you responsible for the sins of other men." Cole looked at the old chief, then at Aida, who stood silent in the doorway, her face unreadable. He thought about 6 weeks of learning, of struggling, of slowly finding his place among people who'd had every reason to kill him, but had chosen instead to teach him. He thought about Kuruk's patient instruction, about Hanaya trusting him with a position in the hunt, about children who'd stopped throwing stones and started offering shy smiles. He thought about his brother Samuel standing between a drowning child and a raging river. He thought about his father saying, "Don't throw your life away for strangers." And he realized with crystal clarity that he was done running, done letting fear make his decisions, done choosing survival over everything else that might give survival meaning. "No," Cole said quietly, "I'll go meet them, lead them away from here. But I do it on my terms, not because I'm running away." Chato's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his ancient eyes. "That is suicide, Cole Morrison." "Maybe, but it's my choice to make." A voice spoke from outside the wiki-up, harsh and challenging. "Then you don't make it alone." Dakota pushed through the entrance, his face set with an expression Cole had learned to recognize as determined stubbornness. "You would die for people you barely know. I'm not dying for anyone. I'm standing up because I'm tired of running." Cole met Dakota's eyes without flinching. "Those men are coming because of me. If I don't lead them away, they'll attack this village looking for bounty money. People will die. Children might die. I won't have that on my conscience." Dakota studied him for a long moment, and Cole saw something shift in the warrior's face. Some recognition that transcended language and culture, warrior acknowledging warrior regardless of skin or history. "Then you don't go alone," Dakota repeated. "I will ride with you." "And I." Kuruk appeared in the doorway, his old face creased with something that might have been approval. Two younger warriors pushed forward as well, Hania and another youth named Yanaba. "We stand with the white man," Hania said simply. Chief Chato looked at each of them in turn, then nodded slowly. 5 against 5. The odds are balanced, but you fight on your terms in country you choose. Use the canyon." "Devil's Canyon?" Dakota asked. "Yes. Narrow walls, one entrance, perfect for ambush if you position correctly." The old chief stood his movements stiff with age but still dignified. "You leave at full dark. I will send scouts to track the white men to ensure they follow you and not return here." Cole felt tension drain from his shoulders, some knot of tension he'd been carrying for 6 weeks, or maybe his whole life. These men didn't owe him anything. Some, like Dakota, had every reason to want him dead. But they were willing to stand beside him anyway, to fight for him, because that's what their code demanded. Not law now, but something deeper. Brotherhood forged in shared purpose. Aida stepped forward, then her hands holding something wrapped in cloth. She unwrapped it to reveal a silver medallion on a leather cord, its surface etched with symbols Cole didn't recognize but could feel the weight of. Turquoise stones caught the fading light. "Nashoba wore this the night he died," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the emotion Cole could see in her eyes. "It did not save him, but perhaps it will remind you to come back, not for me, for yourself." She placed it around Cole's neck, her fingers lingering for just a moment at his collar. Her hands were warm despite the evening chill, and Cole found himself wanting to say something profound, something that would acknowledge what this moment meant. But words failed him, as they so often did when they mattered most. "I'll come back," he said, instead simple and direct. "You better," said a young voice from outside. Kiona pushed past the warriors, her face fierce, despite the tears tracking down her cheeks. "You still owe me 3 stories about the white man's world. You die out there, and I'll drag you back from the spirit world to finish them." Despite everything, Cole found himself smiling. Kiona had appointed herself, his teacher in Apache language and customs, a role she took with deadly seriousness and frequent exasperation at his slow progress. In 6 weeks, she'd taught him enough to follow basic conversations and enough hand signals to hunt effectively. She'd also developed a fascination with his stories about trains and telegraph lines and cities with buildings 3 stories tall. 3 stories when I get back," Cole promised. "You have my word." As darkness fell, the 5 riders prepared in silence. Cole checked his Colt, making sure each chamber held a live round. Dakota and the others prepared their rifles and bows, their movements efficient and practiced. Kuruk produced strips of dried meat and hardtack supplies that would keep them going through what promised to be a long night. They mounted as the first stars emerged, their horses fresh and eager despite the cold. Cole looked back once as they rode out, seeing Aita's silhouette against the firelight, her hand raised in what might have been blessing or farewell. Then the darkness swallowed them, and there was only the night and the trail ahead, and 5 men riding toward a confrontation that would determine more than just survival. Devil's Canyon lay 10 miles west, a slash in the earth where ancient water had carved stone into vertical walls 40 feet high. They reached it 2 hours before midnight, the moon bright enough to show the narrow entrance and the rocks that would serve as cover. "Here," Dakota said, dismounting. "Kuruk and Hanaya take the east rim. Yanaba, you take the west with your bow. Cole and I make the decoy camp in the canyon floor." They worked quickly, arranging bedrolls stuffed with brush to look like sleeping men building a fire that would be visible from a distance. The trap was simple but effective, and Cole found himself impressed by how efficiently these warriors adapted to the situation. As they settled into position, Dakota spoke quietly in English. "Why did you really help Aita that night? Tell me the truth." Cole considered lying, but what was the point now? "I don't know. Maybe I'm tired of being the kind of man my father raised." What kind was that? The kind who survives but doesn't live. Dakota was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. Neshoba used to say something similar. He said the wolf who hunts alone eats scraps. The wolf in the pack eats well. They fell silent after that, waiting in the darkness, with weapons ready and nerves stretched tight. Somewhere to the west, 5 hard men rode through the night hunting for $300 and whatever violence the night might bring. And here, in a narrow canyon, under a cold moon, 5 men waited to show them that some prey fought back. Cole touched the medallion at his throat, feeling the weight of it, feeling the weight of every choice that had led him to this moment. He'd run from so much in his life, but tonight he would stand. And whatever came next would come because he'd chosen it, not because fear or law or circumstance had made the choice for him. The waiting continued, and in the silence, Cole Morrison discovered that sometimes courage isn't the absence of fear. Sometimes it's just the decision to stop running long enough to see what you're really made of. The first sound Cole heard was the scrape of a boot on stone so faint it might have been imagination, except for the way Dakota's hand tightened on his rifle. 1 hour past midnight, by Cole's estimation, the moon hanging overhead like a witness that didn't care who lived or died in the drama unfolding below. Cole pressed himself flatter against the boulder, his Colt drawn, and ready, his other hand unconsciously touching the medallion at his throat. The canyon walls rose on either side like the ribs of some great beast, trapping sound and amplifying every footfall, every breath, every heartbeat that seemed loud enough to give away their position. More sounds now definitely real. Horses moving slowly, riders who knew enough to be cautious. Cole risked a glance around the boulder and saw shadows materializing from the darkness, 5 riders approaching the fake camp with weapons drawn. Even in the moonlight, he recognized Jackson Dalton's bulk, leading the group, recognized the way the big man sat, his horse like a king, surveying conquered territory. They were 50 yards out when the night exploded. A gunshot cracked from somewhere behind the Dalton position, the muzzle flash brief but unmistakable. One of the riders jerked and fell, and Cole realized with ice in his gut that someone had been behind them, a rear guard they hadn't anticipated. The carefully laid trap had just become chaos. "Dakota!" Cole hissed, but the warrior was already moving, sprinting toward the source of that shot with his rifle raised. Cole saw Hanaya fall from the east rim, saw blood bloom dark against his shirt, and understood in a terrible instant that everything had gone wrong. The Dalton gang reacted like professionals, wheeling their horses and charging into the canyon, rather than retreating into the unknown darkness behind them. They'd spotted the fake camp, realized it was a trap, and decided their best chance was to push through rather than turn back. Cole came around the boulder, firing his Colt, bucking in his hand as he aimed for center mass on the nearest rider. The man pitched sideways, but didn't fall, clinging to his saddle as his horse veered away. 2 more shots from Cole's position, but the riders were moving fast now, using the confusion and darkness to their advantage. Kuruk's rifle spoke from the east rim, the distinctive crack of a Spencer repeater firing as fast as the old warrior could work the lever. One of Dalton's men went down hard, his horse screaming as it stumbled over rocks. 3 riders remained now, plus whoever had shot Hanaya from behind. Cole's Colt clicked empty. He dropped behind the boulder to reload, his fingers clumsy with adrenaline as he fumbled cartridges from his belt. A bullet spanged off the rock inches from his head, showering him with stone fragments that stung like hornets. "Cole Morrison," Jackson Dalton's voice boomed through the canyon, amplified by the narrow walls. "I know you're in there, boy. We don't want Apache trouble. Give yourself up. We take you back to Tucson. Everybody else lives." Cole finished reloading and risked another look. Dalton had dismounted behind a cluster of rocks 40 feet away, his 2 remaining men taking cover on either side. Smart positioning, hard to flank, good fields of fire. These weren't drunk cowboys. These were men who'd survived by being better at violence than their opponents. He lies. Dakota's voice came from somewhere to Cole's left, but Cole couldn't see him in the darkness. They will kill us all regardless. Dakota was probably right, but Cole's mind raced through options anyway. If he surrendered, maybe the gang would take him and leave. Maybe. Or maybe they'd kill everyone who could identify them and take the bounty money anyway. Too many maybes, too much risk. But if he didn't surrender, this fight would continue until someone died. Maybe everyone died. And for what? $300, that wasn't even rightfully his. Cole thought about his brother Samuel drowning to save a stranger's child. Thought about his father saying it was stupid to throw your life away for people who meant nothing. And he realized that somewhere in the past 6 weeks, these people had stopped meaning nothing. Karuk, with his patient teaching. Hanaya, with his shy smiles and willingness to include an outsider in the hunt. Even Dakota, who'd gone from wanting Cole dead to standing beside him in the darkness. "I'm coming out," Cole shouted. "Hold your fire." "Cole, no." Dakota's voice held genuine alarm. But Cole was already standing, hands raised, his Colt holstered. He stepped into the open, into the moonlight, making himself a target because maybe that would be enough. Maybe his surrender would satisfy whatever dark hunger drove men like Jackson Dalton. "Where's the money, boy?" Dalton called from his cover. "In my saddlebag at the camp." Cole gestured toward the fake campfire still burning 50 yards behind him. Dalton nodded to one of his men, a thin weasel of a figure who scurried toward the camp in a low crouch. Cole watched him go, watched him reach the saddlebags thrown casually beside the fake bedrolls, watched him bend to search through them. And that's when Cole drew and fired in one smooth motion, the countless hours of practice with Kuruk paying off as muscle memory took over from thought. The shot took the weasel in the shoulder, spinning him around and away from any weapon he might have been reaching for. Not fatal, but disabling. Simultaneously, Dakota's rifle cracked from Cole's left, and Kuruk's Spencer spoke from above. Cole was already diving back behind his boulder as return fire kicked up dust where he'd been standing. He'd gambled that the moment one of Dalton's men broke cover, the others would instinctively move to support him, and the gamble paid off. Now they were exposed targets against the canyon wall. But so was Cole. A bullet punched through the top of his boulder, sending rock fragments into his face. Another round ricocheted off stone with a whine like an angry wasp. Cole rolled left, came up firing, placing shots as fast as he could aim. One of Dalton's men went down screaming, clutching his leg. Movement to Cole's right. He spun to see another figure emerging from the darkness, the rear guard who'd shot Hanaya. The man had a rifle raised and pointed directly at Dakota's position. Cole didn't think, didn't calculate odds or consequences. He just fired. The shot took the man in the chest. He staggered backward, his rifle discharging into the air, and fell. But in turning to make that shot, Cole had exposed himself to Dalton's position. He saw the muzzle flash, felt something punch him in the left shoulder with stunning force, and then he was falling. The ground hit him hard, driving the air from his lungs. His left arm wouldn't respond, wouldn't move, and when he tried to push himself up with his right, his hand came away slick with blood. The medallion at his throat felt heavy, pulling him down, and he wondered distantly if this was how it ended. Shot in a canyon for money, he'd won cheating at cards, dying for people who'd only known him 6 weeks. Seemed about right, actually. Seemed like exactly the kind of stupid death his father had warned him about. Through a haze of pain, Cole heard boots running, heard Dakota's voice shouting something in Apache. Then hands were on him, rolling him over, and Dakota's face swam into view above him, tight with concern, and something that might have been respect. "How bad?" Cole managed through gritted teeth. "Bad enough. Hold still." Dakota's knife flashed in the moonlight, cutting away Cole's shirt. Cole felt pressure on his shoulder, felt pain, that made the world go white at the edges, and heard himself make sounds he wasn't proud of. From somewhere distant came the sound of running horses, someone fleeing into the night. "Dalton!" Cole gasped. "Wounded but alive. He runs." Dakota's hands moved with surprising gentleness as he pressed cloth against the wound. "You saved my life. That man, he would have killed me." "Then we're even. You saved mine 6 weeks ago by not killing me when you had the chance." Dakota's laugh was sharp and brief. "You are not dying today, white man. I forbid it." Kuruk appeared beside them, his weathered face grave in the moonlight. He examined Cole's shoulder with hands that had seen too many wounds to count, prodding and poking in ways that made Cole's vision swim. Then the old warrior produced a knife and held the blade in the campfire until it glowed red. "This will hurt," Kuruk said in his accented English. "Worse than getting shot, much worse." Kuruk wasn't lying. The hot blade against torn flesh sent Cole into a place beyond pain, beyond thought, beyond anything except the desperate need to scream. Dakota held him down while Kuruk worked, cauterizing the wound with the precision of someone who'd performed this service too many times. The smell of burning flesh filled Cole's nostrils, making his stomach heave. Then it was over, and Cole lay gasping in the dirt, his shoulder wrapped in strips of cloth torn from someone's shirt. The world tilted and spun, but he was alive. Against all odds and common sense, he was alive. "Hanaya," he managed to ask. Kuruk's face told him the answer before the words came. "The young warrior has walked the spirit path. The bullet took him in the heart. He died before we could reach him." Cole closed his eyes, feeling guilt and grief wash over him in waves. Hanaya, who'd trusted him enough to hunt beside him, who'd smiled when Cole made mistakes, and taught him patiently how to move silently through brush. Dead because Cole had won money cheating at cards. Dead because Marshal Wade Thornton couldn't let a debt go unpaid. "This is my fault," Cole whispered. "No." Dakota's voice was hard as stone. "This is the fault of men who value money over life. You did not shoot Hania. You tried to save him. You took a bullet meant for me." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried different weight. "I came here tonight hoping you would fail, hoping you would prove yourself unworthy of Aita, of our tribe. Instead, you fought like one of us, bled like one of us. You have passed the first trial, Cole Morrison, the trial of blood." Cole wanted to argue, wanted to say he'd only survived through luck and other people's competence. But consciousness was slipping away like water through his fingers, and the last thing he saw before darkness claimed him was Dakota's face above him, solemn and approving in the moonlight. He woke to dawn and the smell of herbs he'd learned to recognize. Yerba mansa, the wound plant. Mormon tea for fever. Others he couldn't identify. His shoulder was on fire, but it was a clean fire, the kind that came from healing rather than infection. He tried to sit up and found Aida's hand on his chest, pressing him back down. "Be still," she said quietly. "You lost much blood. Your body needs rest." "Hania, we have brought him home. He will be honored as a warrior who died protecting his people." Her voice remained steady, but Cole saw the grief in her eyes. Hanaya had been young, barely more than a boy, and now he was gone. "I'm sorry," Cole said, knowing how inadequate the words were. "Do not apologize for living. Hanaya made his choice as you made yours. Honor his choice by surviving." Cole became aware of other presences, opened his eyes wider to see Chief Chato standing nearby, flanked by other elders. The old chief's face was unreadable, as always, but something in his posture suggested this was a formal moment, a ceremony of some kind. "Cole Morrison," Chato said, his voice carrying the weight of ritual. "Last night you stood when you could have run. You fought when you could have surrendered. You took a wound protecting one who had been your enemy. These actions speak louder than words." The chief paused, looking at the assembled elders who nodded one by one. "You have passed the first trial, the trial of blood. You have proven your courage and your willingness to stand with your people when darkness comes, We acknowledge this. Your people. The word struck with more force than any bullet. Somewhere in the past 6 weeks, without him noticing or intending it, these had become his people. Not by law now, but by choice, by shared struggle and spilled blood. Rest now, Chato continued. Heal. When you are strong again, we will speak of the second trial. But know this, few white men have come as far as you have come. Fewer still have survived to see what comes next. The elders filed out, leaving Cole alone with Aita. She continued her work, changing the dressing on his shoulder with hands that were gentle but efficient. Cole watched her face, seeing the concentration there, the competence, the strength that had allowed her to survive her own grief and help him through his pain. The medallion, he said, suddenly remembering. Did it? Aita reached beneath his blanket and produced the silver disc. A dent marred its surface right where the bullet would have struck his heart if the medallion hadn't been there. The turquoise stones were cracked, but still held in place. Neshoba protected you, she said softly. Even from the spirit world, he kept his promise to guard those who cannot guard themselves. Cole stared at the damaged medallion, feeling the weight of everything it represented. A dead husband's legacy, a living wife's grief, a promise kept across the boundary between life and death. He'd worn it as a token, a good luck charm, but it had proven to be so much more. I'll come back, he told Aita before leaving for the canyon. And he had, barely bloodied and forever changed, but he had returned. The compass around his neck no longer seemed to matter much. North or south, east or west, none of those directions held what he'd found here in this village where he'd arrived as a prisoner and was slowly becoming something else entirely. Sleep now, Aita said, her hand cool on his forehead. Tomorrow brings its own trials. Tonight you rest. Cole closed his eyes and let the darkness take him, but this time it was the darkness of healing sleep rather than unconsciousness. And in his dreams he saw his brother Samuel smiling, approving, as if to say that maybe throwing your life away for others wasn't stupid after all. Maybe it was the only thing that made life worth living. The night passed, and with it something in Cole Morrison died, while something else was being born. The man who'd ridden into the desert running from everything was gone. In his place, a man who'd learned to stand his ground no matter the cost. 2 weeks had passed since the canyon, and Cole Morrison's shoulder had healed enough that he could work again, though the scar tissue pulled tight whenever he raised his arm above his head. Kuruk said it would loosen with time, said scars were just the body's way of remembering lessons learned in blood. Cole figured that was about as philosophical as the old warrior got. December had settled over the Arizona territory with the kind of cold that made bones ache and fires necessary from dusk until dawn. The village had grown quieter in the aftermath of Hanaya's death. The young warrior honored with ceremonies Cole didn't fully understand, but felt deep in his chest anyway. They'd burned his body on a pyre that lit the night sky, and for 3 days afterward, the women had keened their grief in songs that made Cole's throat tight with unshed tears. Dakota had changed toward him after the canyon. Not friendship exactly, but something like respect between warriors who'd stood back to back against death and survived. They worked together now. When the hunt required it, spoke in the shorthand of men who'd bled together, acknowledged each other with nods that carried more weight than words. But it was the nights that troubled Cole most. Nights when he'd wake from dreams of Hanaya falling, of that rifle shot echoing through the canyon of the young warrior's blood, dark against stone. Nights when Aita would appear at the wiki-up entrance, with tea that helped him sleep, her presence, a comfort he hadn't known he needed until she offered it. This particular morning found Cole at Kuruk's workshop cleaning rifles with the automatic precision 6 weeks of practice had instilled. The old warrior worked beside him in companionable silence, both men's hands moving through familiar motions while their minds wandered elsewhere. "You dream still," Kuruk said, without looking up from the rifle stock he was repairing. Not a question, just a statement of observed fact. "How do you know?" "Because I dream too. Every man I have killed walks through my sleep. They do not come to haunt. They come to remind me that taking life is a weight carried forever. Kuruk set down his tools and looked at Cole directly. The young warrior's death troubles you. He died because of me. He died because evil men value money over life. You did not pull the trigger. You tried to save him. The old warrior's weathered face softened slightly. Guilt is natural. It means you have a soul. But do not let it become a prison. Hanaya would not want that. Before Cole could respond, a commotion erupted from the village center. Raised voices, the sound of people gathering. Cole and Kuruk exchanged glances and moved toward the noise, arriving to find Chief Chato standing before the council fire, his presence commanding immediate silence from the assembled tribe. "Cole Morrison," the chief called, when he spotted Cole at the edge of the crowd. "Come forward." Cole's stomach tightened as he walked into the circle, feeling hundreds of eyes on him, feeling the weight of judgment and expectation. Aida stood among the women, her face carefully neutral. Dakota stood with the warrior's arms crossed, expression unreadable. "You have been with us 3 moons now," Chato said, his voice carrying to every ear. "You have worked. You have learned. You have fought and bled with our warriors. You have passed the trial of blood through courage and sacrifice." The chief paused, letting the words settle like snow on stone. "Now comes the second trial, the trial of spirit. This test is not of body but of heart and mind. It will determine if you truly understand what it means to walk the Apache path." His voice nearly failed him. "What do I have to do? You will journey alone to the sacred mountain, Chiricahua Peak, where our ancestors speak to those who listen. You will fast for 3 days and 3 nights. You will seek vision. You will return with understanding." Understanding of what? Chato's eyes held something that might have been sympathy. That is for the mountain to teach and for you to discover. But know this, the mountain shows truth. It strips away the lies we tell ourselves and reveals what lies beneath. Many men have gone to the mountain seeking visions. Not all have returned. The crowd murmured at this, a sound like wind through dry grass. Cole felt fear settle cold in his gut. 3 days without food in December, cold on a mountain seeking visions he didn't believe in from spirits he wasn't sure existed. It sounded like a recipe for freezing to death while hallucinating. "When do I leave?" "Tomorrow at dawn. Tonight you will purify yourself in the sweat lodge. You will leave behind all possessions. The mountain accepts no gifts but your presence." Cole nodded, not trusting his voice, and the crowd began to disperse. But Aida remained, and when the others had gone, she approached him with something wrapped in cloth. "This is pollen," she said, unwrapping a small leather pouch, "for blessing. Also, so you remember, someone waits for your return." Cole took the pouch, feeling the fine powder shift inside. "I don't believe in visions, Aida. I don't know what I'm supposed to see up there." "Then perhaps that is the first lie you must shed." Her dark eyes searched his face. "You do not have to believe. You only have to be open to what comes. The mountain cares nothing for your beliefs. It shows what is not what you think should be." "What if I don't come back?" "Then I will know you were not meant to be mine. But I will be grateful for the time you stood beside me." She reached up her fingers, brushing the scar on his shoulder, visible through his shirt. "You have already proven yourself braver than most men. Now prove you can be humble enough to listen." That evening, Cole endured the sweat lodge ceremony. The structure was small, barely large enough for him and the 3 elders who conducted the ritual. They poured water over heated stones until steam filled the space so thick he could barely breathe. They chanted in Apache words that rose and fell like waves. They smoked a pipe filled with tobacco and herbs that made Cole's head swim. Through it all, Cole felt himself being stripped down, layer by layer. The steam leached sweat and toxins from his body. The chanting filled his mind, pushing out the constant chatter of worry and planning. The smoke carried away something he couldn't name but felt leaving like a weight lifted. When they finally emerged into the cold night air, Cole felt hollowed out, scraped clean, more vulnerable than he'd been since childhood. Kuruk draped a blanket over his shoulders and led him to Aita's wickiup, where a simple meal waited. Corn cakes and weak tea, nothing more. The last food he'd have until the trial ended. "The mountain will be cold," Kuruk said, his voice gentle, in a way Cole had rarely heard. "But if you listen more than you speak, if you watch more than you act, the cold will not kill you. Fear kills faster than cold. Remember that." Cole slept fitfully that night, waking often to stare at stars visible through the smoke hole in the wickiup roof. Each time he woke, he heard Aita's breathing from inside the structure, steady and calm, and something about that rhythm helped him find sleep again. Dawn came pale and cold, the sun a distant promise on the eastern horizon. Cole dressed in the simple clothing laid out for him, leather pants and shirt moccasins instead of boots. No weapons, no tools, only the small pouch of pollen Aita had given him, and the clothes on his back. The village gathered to witness his departure, a smaller ceremony than the one that had sent him to fight in the canyon, but no less significant. Kiona pushed through the crowd and hugged him fiercely, whispering, "You come back. You still owe me stories." Dakota clasped his forearm in the warrior's grip. "The mountain shows what you need to see, not what you want to see. Trust that." Kuruk simply nodded his ancient eyes, holding approval and something that might have been pride. And then Chief Chato stepped forward, holding something that made Cole's breath catch. His father's compass, the one he'd worn around his neck since Texas, the one Aita must have taken while he slept. "You must leave behind all things of the old world," Chato said, not unkindly. "The mountain accepts no anchors to what was, only openness to what will be." Cole stared at the compass, at the brass worn smooth by his father's hands, and then his own at the face that had pointed him north for freedom countless times. Leaving it behind felt like leaving behind his last connection to the man he'd been before the desert, before Aita, before everything changed. He reached out and took it from Chato's hands, held it for a long moment, feeling its familiar weight, then handed it back. "Keep it safe. I'll need it when I return." If I return, his mind whispered, but he didn't give voice to the doubt. The path to Chiricahua Peak wound through arroyos and over ridges, climbing steadily into country where the air grew thin and the cold bit deeper. A young warrior named Kohana accompanied Cole for the first 5 miles, showing him the trail, pointing out landmarks. Then, at a place where the path split around a massive boulder, Kohana stopped. "From here you walk alone. Follow the sun. The sacred place is at the peak where the eagle's nest and the wind speaks. You will know it when you arrive." The young warrior paused, then added quietly, "My father went to the mountain when I was young. He came back different. Better. I hope the same for you." Then Kohana was gone, heading back down the trail, and Cole stood alone at the split in the path, with nothing but instinct and stubbornness to guide him. He climbed. The sun tracked overhead as he ascended, the trail growing steeper, the air growing colder. His shoulder ached where the bullet wound was still healing, but the pain was distant, manageable. His stomach growled with hunger, but he'd been hungry before. This was different only in degree, not kind. By the time the sun reached its peak, Cole had climbed above the scrub brush into country where only stunted junipers clung to life between rocks. The view stretched for miles, the desert below, looking like a rumpled blanket of browns and grays, the village invisible from this height. Up here, civilization felt like a dream. Only stone and sky and the whisper of wind through sparse vegetation. He reached the summit 2 hours before sunset. The sacred place was obvious even to his untrained eye, a natural amphitheater of stone with a cave at its center. Petroglyphs covered the cave walls, ancient symbols etched by hands long turned to dust. The images showed hunters and prey spirits and ceremonies, a record of people who'd come here seeking wisdom long before Cole Morrison was born. Cole built a small fire using dried wood he found scattered near the cave entrance, working with techniques Kuruk had taught him. The flames caught and held, providing warmth against the gathering cold. Then he settled with his back against the stone wall and began to wait. The first night passed in hunger and discomfort. Cold seeped through his leather clothing despite the fire. His stomach cramped and complained. His mind raced through scenarios, through worries, through the endless chatter of a brain that refused to be quiet. He dozed fitfully, waking often to feed the fire, seeing nothing but darkness and stars and the slow wheel of constellations overhead. The second day brought weakness. Cole's legs shook when he stood to gather more firewood. His head felt light, disconnected from his body. He drank from a small spring that trickled from cracks in the stone, the water so cold it hurt his teeth, and tried to quiet his mind enough to hear whatever the mountain was supposed to say. But all he heard was wind and the distant cry of eagles, and his own thoughts circling like buzzards over roadkill. By the second night, Cole had moved beyond hunger into a strange clarity where his body felt like something separate from himself. The fire seemed brighter, its flames forming shapes that resolved into faces and then dissolved again. The stars pulsed with light that seemed to have rhythm and meaning. And in the darkness between firelight and starlight, Cole began to see things that shouldn't be there. His brother Samuel stood at the edge of the light looking exactly as he had the day before he drowned. Not dead, not a spirit, just Samuel in his work clothes with that easy smile that had always made Cole feel safe. "You've been running a long time, little brother," Samuel said, his voice carrying across the years without losing any of its warmth. "You're not real," Cole said, but his voice shook with uncertainty. "Real enough for this conversation." Samuel sat down across the fire, the flames casting shadows across his familiar face. "You've been carrying my death like a weight around your neck, like somehow you could have stopped it, like Pa was right that helping people is stupid. Pa said you threw your life away. Pa was scared that if he cared too much about anything, he'd get hurt when it was taken away. So he taught us not to care, not to get attached, not to stand for anything." Samuel leaned forward, his eyes catching the firelight. "But you know what's funny? Pa died alone in that house in Texas, bitter and angry, with nobody who cared enough to sit with him at the end. That's what his philosophy got him." Cole felt tears on his face, hot against the cold air. "I don't want to end up like him." "Then stop running. Stop choosing fear over everything else." Samuel gestured to the valley below, invisible in the darkness. "You see that village down there? Those people, they're not your cage, Cole. They're your purpose, your reason for being, the thing that makes surviving worth the effort." "But the law bound me. I didn't choose this." Samuel's laugh was gentle, understanding. "You chose the moment you helped Aida. Everything after has just been you figuring out what that choice meant." The vision shimmered and faded, and Cole found himself alone again by the fire, tears drying cold on his cheeks. He fed more wood to the flames, his hands moving automatically, while his mind spun through what he'd seen, or hallucinated or imagined. The third day brought strange clarity, mixed with weakness, that made standing difficult. Cole's body felt light, as if he might float away on the next gust of wind. His mind drifted between waking and sleeping, between reality and vision, the boundaries growing thin as tissue paper. He saw his father, old and bitter, sitting across the fire where Samuel had been. The old man looked at Cole with eyes that held more pain than anger, more loneliness than strength. "You're becoming weak," his father said, the familiar criticism cutting even through layers of hallucination. "Like your brother." "Maybe," Cole heard himself say, his voice distant, "or maybe I'm becoming strong enough to care." Caring gets you killed. Living without it already did. You died alone, Pa. Is that the strength you wanted? Is that the victory you spent your life achieving? His father's form wavered, aged became frail. "I died alone," the old man admitted, and for the first time in Cole's memory, his father looked uncertain. "Every day I pushed people away to stay strong. And in the end, strength didn't matter because there was nobody left who cared if I lived or died." The vision faded like smoke in wind, and Cole understood with terrible clarity that he'd been heading down the same path. Running from connection, from responsibility, from anything that might make him vulnerable. Building walls so high that nobody could hurt him, not realizing that those same walls kept out everything worth living for. The sun reached its peak on the third day, and Cole sat in that natural amphitheater of stone feeling scraped raw, exposed, every defense stripped away. He was weaker than he'd ever been, more vulnerable, more open. And in that openness, the mountain finally spoke, not with words, with presence. A wolf emerged from the cave behind him, moving with liquid grace across stone. Cole's rational mind knew he should be afraid, knew wolves were dangerous, especially to men weakened by fasting. But the rational mind had grown quiet, and what remained felt only recognition. The wolf was massive, its coat gray and silver, its eyes holding intelligence that seemed almost human. It crossed the space between cave and fire and settled beside Cole, its warmth pressing against his injured shoulder. Cole's hand moved without thought to rest on the wolf's back, feeling thick fur, feeling the rise and fall of breath, feeling more alive in this moment than he'd felt in years. "Nashoba," Cole whispered, knowing it was impossible, knowing it made no sense, knowing it anyway. The wolf turned its head to look at him, and in those amber eyes, Cole saw understanding, saw forgiveness, saw approval. This was the man who died protecting children, the warrior whose medallion had saved Cole's life. Whether the wolf was real or vision or some combination, it didn't matter. The message was clear. You are not alone. You have never been alone. But you must choose to accept the pack. Cole fell asleep with his hand buried in wolf fur, and when he woke hours later, the wolf was gone. But thick gray hairs clung to his leather shirt, and tracks in the dust showed where the animal had circled his sleeping form like a guardian. The fourth dawn broke cold and brilliant, the sun painting the eastern sky in shades of orange and gold. Cole rose on shaking legs, his body weak but his mind crystalline clear. He scattered the fire, covered the ashes, left the sacred place as he'd found it, except for the small pile of pollen he sprinkled at the cave entrance as thanks. The descent was harder than the climb, his weakened body struggling with balance and coordination. But each step downward felt like walking towards something rather than away. Not running anymore, choosing. He found his father's compass lying on a flat stone halfway down the trail. Impossible because Chato had it back at the village. But there it sat in morning sunlight, the brass catching the light. Cole picked it up, opened the case, watched the needle spin wildly before settling. The needle pointed south toward the village, toward home. Cole looked at it for a long moment, then snapped the case closed. He didn't need the compass to know which way to go anymore. The direction wasn't in the needle, it was in his heart. He reached the village as the sun approached its peak, stumbling more than walking, his vision narrowing to a tunnel. The whole tribe had gathered waiting, and Cole saw Aida break from the crowd to run toward him. Her hands caught him as his legs finally gave out, and he sank to his knees with her arms around him. "What did you see?" she asked urgently, her face close to his. "I saw that I've been running from the wrong thing my whole life," Cole said, his voice hoarse from 3 days without speaking. "I thought freedom meant going anywhere, but freedom is knowing where you belong." Chief Chato approached, his weathered face unreadable. "You have been to the mountain, you have fasted, you have sought vision. What did the spirits teach you?" Cole looked at the old chief at Aita, holding him at Takota and Kuruk and Kiona and all the faces that had become familiar over 3 months of learning and struggling and slowly finding his place. "They taught me that belonging isn't a cage, it's a choice, and that I'm tired of choosing fear over everything else that makes life worth living." Chato studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You have passed the trial of spirit. You have looked within and found truth. This is the hardest journey, and you have survived it." The old chief raised his voice so the whole village could hear. Cole Morrison has completed 2 trials. The trial of blood through courage, the trial of spirit through humility. Only 1 trial remains. Cole felt his heart skip. What's the 3rd trial? And then Chato said something that made Cole's world tilt on its axis. There is no 3rd trial. There has never been a 3rd trial. Silence fell over the gathered tribe. Cole stared at the chief, not understanding, not processing the words that made no sense. The 1st trial tests the body. Chato continued, his voice carrying ancient wisdom. The 2nd tests the mind. But the 3rd trial is not a test at all. It is a choice. I don't understand. You are free, Cole Morrison. The law releases you. Aida's mourning year ends tomorrow at sunrise. You have fulfilled your obligation. You may go wherever the compass points, and no one will stop you. The words should have brought joy relief, the satisfaction of a debt paid. Instead, they brought only confusion and something that felt uncomfortably like loss. But you said 3 trials. I said you would face trials until you were free or bound forever. You have proven yourself worthy. Therefore, you are free. Chato's eyes held something that might have been satisfaction. What happens next is not law. It is choice. Your choice and Aita's choice. Will you stay because you must or because you wish to? That is the only trial that matters. Cole looked at Aita, saw tears threatening at the corners of her eyes, saw hope and fear warring in her expression. He thought about the mountain, about visions of his brother and father, about the wolf that might have been real, or might have been his own mind showing him truth. He thought about 3 months of learning and fighting, and slowly becoming someone different from the man who'd ridden into the desert running from everything. And he realized he had no idea what to do with freedom now that he had it. The compass in his hand pointed south toward the village, but the village was here. So what was it pointing toward? What was home when home had become people, instead of a place? I need time to think, Cole said, finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Chato nodded as if he'd expected this. You have until tomorrow's sunrise. When Aida's mourning ends, you will both be free to choose your paths, together or apart. That choice belongs to you alone. The crowd dispersed slowly, and Aida helped Cole to her wickiup where food waited. Real food after 3 days of fasting. But Cole found he had no appetite, no interest in anything except the question echoing in his mind. What did he want? Not what the law demanded, not what circumstance required, but what did Cole Morrison actually want for his life? For the first time in 25 years, he had the freedom to decide. And the weight of that freedom felt heavier than any chain. The food Aida brought tasted like ash in Cole's mouth, though his body devoured it with the desperate hunger of 3 days fasting. Corn cakes and roasted rabbit dried fruit that had been saved for winter water so cold it made his teeth ache. His stomach cramped around the sudden abundance, but he forced himself to eat slowly, to let his body remember how to process nourishment. Aida sat across from him in silence, her hands busy with work that didn't need doing, straightening baskets that were already straight, arranging herbs that were already arranged. The space between them felt vast, despite the wickiup's small confines filled with words neither knew how to speak. You should rest, she said finally, not meeting his eyes. Your body needs time to recover from the mountain. I'm not tired. A lie, and they both knew it. Cole's hands shook with exhaustion, his vision still swimming at the edges, but the thought of sleep felt impossible when his mind spun like a compass needle that couldn't find north. Then I will rest. You should do as you wish. Aida rose with fluid grace and disappeared into the inner portion of the wickiup, where her sleeping area lay hidden behind woven screens. Cole sat alone by the small fire, watching flames dance across logs that would burn to ash by morning. Everything burned eventually. Everything turned to dust and memory. So why did choices matter so much when the end was always the same? He pulled out the compass, the one he'd found on the trail, despite giving it to Chato. The one that shouldn't exist in his hand, but did anyway. The needle spun lazy circles pointing nowhere and everywhere, as confused as the man holding it. His father's voice echoed in memory. "Never let anyone tie you down, boy. A man with roots is a man with chains." But Samuel's voice countered, "A man without roots is just tumbleweeds coal, blowing wherever the wind takes him, never growing, never becoming anything more than dried brush." Cole closed the compass and stood his legs, protesting the movement. He pushed through the entrance into cold December night, needing air, needing space, needing something he couldn't name, but felt the absence of, like a missing tooth, his tongue kept finding. The village slept around him, wickiups dark, except for smoke holes that glowed faint orange from banked fires. Dogs stirred at his passage, but didn't bark, recognizing him now as belonging rather than intruding. The moon hung overhead like a witness that had seen too much to be impressed by one man's crisis of conscience. Cole walked to the edge of the village where the desert began again, that vast emptiness he'd crossed 4 months ago, carrying $300 and enough fear to fuel a lifetime of running. The money sat untouched in his saddlebag, forgotten in the chaos of learning to survive among people who measured wealth in skill and honor rather than coins. He could take it now, saddle his horse, ride north or south or west, disappear into that darkness and never look back. Chief Chato had said he was free. No warriors would chase him. No law would bind him. Just Cole Morrison and the open trail and all the freedom a man could want. The thought made his lungs constrict as if drowning. "You cannot see the future from here." Kiona's voice startled him from shadow, the young woman materializing like smoke from behind a cluster of rocks. "No matter how long you stare into darkness, shouldn't you be sleeping? Shouldn't you?" She moved to stand beside him, her profile sharp against starlight. "You returned from the mountain different. I can see it in how you move, how you breathe, like something was cut away and something else grew in its place." Cole didn't know how to answer that, so he said nothing. "My sister cried last night." Kiona continued, her voice soft but steady. "After the council, after you left to think, she went to the place where we bury our dead and spoke to Neshoba's spirit. She asked him what to do. What did he say? Nothing. The dead do not answer. But she came back with clear eyes and said she would not ask you to stay. That if you choose to go, she will honor your choice and let you walk free." Kiona turned to look at him directly. "She is stronger than you know, Cole Morrison, strong enough to survive your leaving, but I wonder if you are strong enough to survive leaving her." The words hit harder than Kiona probably intended, striking some nerve Cole hadn't known was exposed. He thought about the mountain, about visions of his father dying alone, about the wolf that might have been Neshoba's spirit showing him what pack meant. "I don't know what I want," he admitted the confession, feeling like failure. "Then you are lying to yourself." Kiona's smile was sad and knowing. "You know? You just fear the knowing because accepting it means accepting everything it demands of you." She walked away before Cole could respond, melting back into shadow as silently as she'd appeared. And Cole stood alone at the desert's edge, realizing that a 19-year-old girl had just spoken more truth than he'd managed in 25 years of living. He did know what he wanted. Had known since the mountain, maybe since the canyon, possibly since the moment Aida's hand had touched his shoulder, and he'd felt less alone than he'd been in a decade. But knowing and accepting were different countries separated by a border made of fear. Fear of commitment, fear of losing freedom, fear of caring so much that loss would destroy him the way Samuel's death had destroyed something in their father. Fear that if he admitted he wanted to stay, wanted to build a life here, wanted Aida with an intensity that made his chest ache, then the universe would punish him for daring to want something beyond survival. Cole walked through the sleeping village, his feet carrying him without conscious thought to Kuruk's dwelling. The old warrior sat outside despite the cold, working on something by the light of a small fire. He looked up as Cole approached but didn't speak, just gestured to a spot across the flames. They sat in silence for a long time, Kuruk's hands moving through their work, Cole's hands empty and restless. Finally, the old warrior set down his tools and fixed Cole with that steady gaze that always seemed to see past skin to something deeper. "The mountain showed you truth," Kuruk said. "Not a question. It showed me I've been running from the wrong things. And now you run from the right things because you are afraid of stopping." Kuruk picked up a stick and poked at the fire, sending sparks spiraling into darkness. "Fear is not weakness, young one. Fear is wisdom, but letting fear make all your choices is cowardice. What if I stay and it all falls apart? What if I care and then lose everything? What if you leave and spend the rest of your life wondering what you walked away from?" Kuruk met his eyes across the flames. "I am old Cole Morrison. I have seen many men make many choices. The ones who regret leaving are far more numerous than the ones who regret staying. But you can't know that, can't promise it won't end in loss." "No, I cannot promise rain will not fall, or enemies will not come, or death will not take what we love. I can only promise that love and belonging are worth the risk of losing them, because the alternative is dying alone, having never truly lived." Cole felt something crack in his chest, some wall he'd been holding against the tide of emotions that had been building since the canyon, since the mountain, since Aita's hand had pressed against his wounded shoulder, and he'd felt what home could mean. "I'm afraid," he whispered, the admission costing more than he'd expected. "Good. Afraid means you understand what you stand to lose. Now choose anyway." Kuruk returned to his work, the conversation apparently over. Cole sat for a moment longer, then rose and walked back through the village toward Aita's wickiup. Dawn was still hours away, but he felt time running out like water through cupped hands. He found his saddlebag where he'd left it months ago, pulled out the $300 that had caused so much trouble. The money felt meaningless now, just paper and promises backed by a government that barely extended its reach into these territories. He set it aside, dug deeper, found items he'd forgotten he was carrying. He stared at the bills for a long moment, remembering the man who'd won them, the man who'd thought $300 was worth running for. That man seemed like a stranger now, a deck of cards worn smooth by countless games. A wanted poster with a face that looked nothing like his, but close enough to cause trouble. A letter from his father written years ago and never answered the words angry and disappointed as always. Cole read it by firelight, seeing past the criticism to the fear underneath the desperate need to protect himself from pain by never admitting he cared about anything. He fed the letter to the flames and watched it curl and blacken and disappear. Then he pulled out a small leather journal, one he'd bought in Tucson, but never written in because writing meant recording, and recording meant acknowledging that his life might be worth remembering. He opened it, now found a stub of pencil, and began to write. Not for himself, for the grandson or granddaughter who might someday want to know how their grandfather found his way home. The words came slowly at first, then faster, spilling out like water from a cracked dam. He wrote about Samuel and the flood, about his father's bitter loneliness, about meeting Aita in the desert and the choice that had changed everything, about wrestling Dakota and learning from Kuruk and the canyon where Hanaya died, about the mountain and visions that showed him truth he'd been avoiding his whole life. He wrote until his hand cramped, and dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, painting the world in shades of gray that would soon bloom into color. He wrote the last line just as the sun broke the horizon. "I gave a ride to a widow in the desert. In return, she showed me what it means to finally stop running." Cole closed the journal and stood, his decision made not in some grand moment of clarity, but in the quiet accumulation of small truths that had been building since the moment Aita's morning ash had marked her as someone who needed help. He walked to the center of the village where the morning fire was being built. Chief Chato was already there, along with other elders who'd gathered to witness whatever choice the day would bring. They looked at Cole with faces that revealed nothing, waiting to see which path he'd choose now that all paths lay open before him. Aita emerged from her wickiup as the sun fully cleared the horizon. She'd prepared for this moment, Cole could see. Her hair had been cut in the traditional way that marked the end of mourning, shorter now and freed from the weight of grief. She wore new clothing, clean and decorated with beadwork that must have taken weeks to create. She looked beautiful and terrified and brave all at once. The entire village gathered in that silent way that marked important ceremonies. Cole saw Dakota standing with arms crossed, his face showing approval mixed with challenge. Saw Kiona wiping tears from her eyes, even though nothing had happened yet. Saw Kuruk nodding as if some prophecy he'd made had just proven true. Chief Chato raised his hands and the crowd fell into absolute silence. "The mourning year has ended," he announced in both Apache and English. "Aita is free to choose her path. Cole Morrison is free to choose his. What was bound by law is now released by time. What happens next belongs to them alone." The old chief looked at Cole, his ancient eyes holding something that might have been hope or might have been test. "Cole Morrison, you have fulfilled all obligations. You are free to go wherever you wish. The question is, what do you wish?" Cole reached for the compass at his throat, that symbol of freedom and direction that had guided him nowhere good for 25 years. He pulled it out, held it up, so the morning sun caught its brass surface, watched the needle spin and settle, pointing south. Then he walked to where Aita stood and placed the compass in her hands. "I've spent my whole life thinking freedom meant going anywhere," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. "Took me 4 months and one stubborn woman to learn that freedom means choosing where you belong." He knelt in the dirt before her, not in the Apache way, but in his own way, offering vulnerability instead of strength, offering choice instead of law. "Aita, I'm asking not because I have to, but because I want to. Because when I rode away yesterday in my mind, every mile felt like dying. Because you didn't trap me, you freed me from a life of running toward nothing." He looked up at her, seeing tears tracking down her face, seeing hope dawning like sunrise. "Will you marry me? Not by law, by choice, because I choose you, and I'm hoping you'll choose me back." For a long moment Aita said nothing. She looked at the compass in her hands, at Cole kneeling in the dirt at the gathered tribe, watching with held breath. Then she set the compass aside and reached down to pull him to his feet. "Stand up, Cole Morrison. Apache men do not kneel." He stood, and she took his hands in hers, her grip strong and certain. "You ask me to choose," she said, her voice clear and steady, "but I chose you the night I gave you the tea, the night I performed the ritual that bound us. I chose you every day you stayed and learned and fought beside my people. I chose you when I gave you Neshoba's medallion and prayed you would return from the canyon." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice shook slightly with emotion, held too long in check. "So yes, Cole Morrison, I choose you, not because the law demands it, but because my heart does. Because you make me laugh and challenge me to be stronger and look at me like I am worth something beyond my dead husband's memory. I choose you because you are worthy of being chosen." The kiss that followed wasn't gentle or tentative. It was fierce and claiming and full of 4 months of tension and fear and slowly building trust. The tribe erupted in cheers and ululations, and Cole felt hands clapping his back, heard Kiona sobbing with joy, heard Dakota's voice raised in approval, but mostly he felt Aita in his arms, solid and real, and choosing him back, and understood finally what Samuel had meant about having something worth standing for. Chief Chato raised his hands for silence, and the crowd quieted to hear his words. 7 days from now, when the moon is full, we will hold the marriage ceremony, not because law requires it, but because choice deserves to be honored." The old chief's face softened into something approaching a smile. "Cole Morrison, you came to us a prisoner of circumstance. You leave that identity today, reborn as one of us by choice and by blood. We welcome you not as outsider, but as family." The celebration that followed lasted into the night. Food appeared from nowhere, drums began their steady rhythm, and people danced in the firelight with abandon born of genuine joy. Cole found himself pulled into the dancing by Kiona-taught steps he fumbled through, while the crowd laughed with him instead of at him. Somewhere in the chaos, Takota appeared at his elbow with a cup of something that burned going down. "You made the right choice," the warrior said simply, "though I doubted you would." "What changed your mind?" "The canyon, the mountain, the way you look at my cousin's widow like she is the sunrise after a long, dark night." Takota drained his own cup and set it aside. Neshoba would approve. He always said the strongest warriors are those brave enough to admit they need others. As the night deepened and the celebration continued, Cole found himself standing at the edge of the firelight with Aida, both of them exhausted and happy and uncertain what came next, but willing to face it together. "Do you regret it?" Aida asked softly. "Giving up your freedom." Cole pulled her close, feeling her warmth against him, feeling like he'd finally found the place he'd been searching for without knowing he was lost. "I didn't give up freedom. I just redefined what it means." He looked down at her, seeing his future in her dark eyes, seeing home and belonging and purpose all wrapped together. "Freedom isn't going anywhere, Aida. It's choosing somewhere. And I choose here. I choose you. Every day from now until the day I die, I'll keep choosing you." She smiled, then the first truly unguarded smile he'd seen from her, and it sparked something deep within him that felt like coming alive after years of being merely functional. "Then I will keep choosing you back, Cole Morrison. Through whatever storms come, through joy and sorrow, through all the days we are given." They stood together as the celebration continued around them, two people who'd been bound by law and freed by time, who'd chosen each other, not because they had to, but because the alternative was unthinkable. And somewhere above them, stars wheeled across the sky, like they'd been wheeling for eons, witnessing another small story of two humans finding each other in the vast darkness, and deciding that together was better than alone. The compass lay forgotten in the dirt its needle no longer needed, because the man who'd carried it had finally learned that true north wasn't a direction. It was a person, a place, a choice to stop wandering and start belonging. Cole had given a ride to a widow in the Arizona desert. She'd shown him what it meant to have something worth staying for, worth fighting for, worth being afraid of losing, because the having was so precious. And in the end, that had made all the difference. 7 days later, they married under a full moon, with the whole tribe as witnesses. 7 months after that, a child was born, a daughter with her mother's eyes and her father's stubborn chin. 7 years after that, Cole Morrison looked back on the man he'd been and barely recognized him. But that morning in December, when he'd knelt in the dirt and chosen belonging over running, chosen love over fear, chosen Aida over the empty freedom of the open trail, that morning, he'd finally understood what his brother Samuel had died trying to teach him. Some things are worth the risk. Some people are worth the vulnerability. Some places are worth calling home, even when home demands you become someone different from who you thought you were. Cole Morrison had been many things in his life: a gambler, a drifter, a man running from everything, including himself. But on that December morning, in an Apache village in the Arizona Territory, he became something new. He became a man who'd finally stopped running and discovered that standing still was the bravest thing he'd ever done. The years that followed were not without hardship. Droughts tested their resilience, winters claimed the old and weak, and rumors of cavalry movements kept warriors vigilant through uncertain times. But through it all, Cole and Aida walked side by side, building a life from the ashes of what they'd both lost. Kuruk lived to see Cole's daughter born in the summer of 1879. The old warrior placed the infant's tiny hand on a rifle stock and smiled his rare smile, murmuring blessings in Apache, before the winter cold took him peacefully 3 months later. They buried him with honors befitting a master craftsman, his tools placed beside him for the journey ahead. Takota became war chief after proving himself in countless skirmishes with raiders and cavalry alike. Though he never married, claiming no woman could match his impossible standards, he declared Cole's children his blood kin, and taught them to track, hunt, and fight with the same patient ferocity he'd once directed at their father. Kiona married a warrior from a neighboring band when she was 21, but visited often with her own growing family. She still demanded stories from Cole, though the 3 promised tales had long since become 300, then 3,000 woven into the fabric of family gatherings around winter fires. The $300 Cole had won in Tucson, he never touched it. The bills remained in his saddlebag, slowly yellowing with age, until one particularly harsh winter when Aita quietly used them to buy food and medicine for the village. Cole never asked, and she never explained. Some debts they'd learned were meant to be repaid in unexpected ways. The compass remained on their lodge wall, its needle frozen, pointing nowhere. Cole sometimes caught his children spinning it, laughing at the useless instrument. He never told them it had once meant everything to him, because by then it meant nothing at all. In 1943, when Cole was 90 and Aita 91, they sat together watching their grandson James prepare to leave for war. The young man wore the medallion that had saved his grandfather's life and carried the compass that had once pointed toward everywhere except home. "Will he come back?" Aita asked quietly, her hand in Cole's, both spotted with age, but still strong from a lifetime of holding on. "He's a Morrison," Cole said, watching the young man adjust his uniform, "and Morrisons always find their way home." James returned in 1946, whole in body, if changed in spirit, carrying stories his grandfather understood in ways others couldn't. The compass came back with him, dented but intact, having guided one more Morrison through darkness to the place where he belonged.